Hello everybody and welcome back. So in this next lesson we're going to be talking about modules. So we've briefly talked about it before where I explained why I import the Houdini module here, but let's discuss what a module actually is. So the same way that we've discussed Python and its object-oriented programming style, and I explained that within each object it has its own functions. So functions that are unique to that object, that data type, and that can only be run on that particular object or data type. Now, modules are essentially just collections of functions, all right? So you can think of a module as its own object with functions inside, except instead of those functions operating on the module itself, the same way that, so a string will have certain functions that can run on a string, okay? So those will be functions contained within the string object data type, right? Well, with modules, you're not instantiating the module. You're not creating an instance of that class and then, running functions on it. Instead, it's kind of a global object that has a bunch of functions in it that we can run on other objects, okay? Or just global functions that kind of do generic things. Okay. Now, you can create your own modules, which later on we are going to do. So we're going to create our own scripts and then import them as modules. And then normally those are going to be very, very specific to what we're trying to do. So we'll import a module specifically to run a certain tool. But there are also general modules that have been created for Python and sort of our general use. But it's a nice way of keeping our functions kind of segregated into different groups where, if you don't need to create random functions right now, then you don't need to import the random module. Only when you do, then you import it. So it kind of keeps things a little bit more streamlined and lets you sort of just import these batches or chunks of Python depending on what you need. Okay. And there are also obviously modules being created by other people, so if there's a function that you're needing, well, you can go and look for it and maybe you'll find a script that you can import that has a module or a function that you need. All right, so I have explained before about why I always import the Houdini module inside of this Python source editor, and so this kind of shows you already how we can work with modules. Basically, there's a keyword function called import, which we just we run import and then the name of the module. Now later on, I am going to cover more in depth about when we create our own modules, how to make it that when we type import and then the name of the module that Houdini will find it. So I'm not going to go into that right now. This is more a general lesson on modules themselves, and then later when we get to creating our own one, I will then show you how to go through the details of that. So the import function lets us essentially point to a module and import it. And there are a bunch of these modules that ship with Python. So long as Python is installed, and I mean Houdini has a Python, Python 2.7 installed, it will have access to the modules that come with that. So we can import a module just as is, and then to access functions within that module, we need to call the module, okay? So it is still object based. So for example, now we've imported Who, right, which is the Houdini module, so it has all of the functions that Houdini has created for Python. If I want to run a function from this module, I need to type Who. So Who dot, and then I have access to all of everything inside of this module. Now, it's not just functions as well. There are also classes. So you'll see the C is here for classes. So there are a lot of classes. And then there are F, which is functions. Okay, and the classes will themselves contain functions and maybe even subclasses and so on. So it is a whole hierarchy of things. There is also other modules as well inside of a module. So you can store a lot of stuff inside of this, right? But in order to access anything inside of it, we call who dot, and then we run something within that. Okay, and then and so on and so forth. So if we call a class within that, then we can call the function within that, and it's all just separated by these dots. So we would do who dot, and then, for example, node is a class, and then I could go dot, and then I can run a method inside of that class. Okay, so maybe the I don't know, hide method, okay, would be run inside of that, and then I can, when I open brackets, it will show me how to run this method. But this method is within this class, which is within this module. Okay. Right, so that's how it kind of works, where we sort of import modules and then work with them. But sometimes we want to import a separate part of a module, so we actually don't want the entire module itself. Okay, so for example, let's talk about a common module that you're going to often use, which is called pprint. Okay, so pprint, in other words, pretty print, is kind of it's a module that has a bunch of functions that help us print strings, but kind of in interesting ways. So it does some string formatting for us, especially when you're printing like massive things like a dictionary. It has ways of kind of printing the dictionary so it's nice and readable. It tabs in depending on the depth of the dictionary, because you can have a dictionary within another dictionary, and now Pretty Print will print that in a nice and readable way. So it is a very useful module. So we can, if we want to access this, we can just say import pprint. Okay, and now from that we say pprint dot, and then we can run a function within that. Okay, but the pprint module is called pprint, but then there's also a sub function within pprint called pprint. Okay, and then we feed it something. So if I just say my string equals, and then I don't know, I'll just print, I'll just create whatever, and then I say print my string, then it's going to print that. Okay, obviously this is not anything that needs kind of pretty printing. We can just do a normal print to get this string, but just to show you that this pprint function is printing my string, but the module itself is called pprint. Okay, now in this case, and in fact I find in most cases with pprint specifically, I don't need any of the other functions within the pprint module. The only one that I want is the actual pprint primary function. Okay, so instead of importing the entire module, we can import just this function. Okay, and how we do that is just by wording this slightly differently. So what we do is we say from pprint, so from the pprint module, import, and then we give it something that is inside of this. Right? Now, please don't get confused. I know it's a little bit confusing because pprint is both the name of the module and the function. So here, module function, okay? But, this here at the beginning is the module. So I'm saying from this module, import only this function. So now if I do it this way, then instead of having to, every time I want to pprint, I have to say pprint.pprint. Instead, I can now just say that, pprint and then this. Because this function has now been imported into Python, like into my session, as pprint. Its alias, its actual object name to call it is pprint. I don't have to first call the module and then call a function within that module, because I didn't import the entire module. I only imported that function. So it's now I've literally added this function to my Houdini session, my Python session, as though it was always a function that existed within standard Python. Okay, and now when I print, it will do the same thing. Okay, so it's a much easier way of doing this. But obviously you need to be careful. If you need other functions from pprint, you might as well import the whole module, because it would really be bad to have to go now from pprint import and then the next function and so on and so on. You've got this whole list of individual things we're importing. If you're going to use it for more than just one thing, then I would just import the module as is. Okay, so but that's one way that we can grab things from within a module. Now there is a different method, and I'm cautious to teach this because I don't want people to do this. It is considered to be very bad practice, but it is important that you should know that it's possible. So what you can do is you say from pprint import, and then if you put a star, that will import everything inside of this module, but it will not be embedded under the module. It will just be imported the same way that pprint can just be now run as a normal function. Okay, it's kind of like it's unwrapping that entire module and just putting all of the contents straight into Houdini, right? Well, into my Python session. The reason this is bad is because what if, you know, there's a function with an overlapping name. Okay, so what if Houdini or Python has a myfunc function. Okay, so this does something, right? Or even Houdini has a function like that we've imported, or we've created our own function called pprint or whatever. So we have a function, but what if inside of pprint there is also a function called myfunc? Okay, well now we're overriding that other function with the one from pprint, or in this case we'd then be importing it, but then we'd be defining our function over here. So like if I go and define this function, right, like if I go and define my own function that I called pprint, but I've gone and imported everything from the pprint module, which includes the pprint function, then we're going to have a problem, right? So I've defined a function where I'm saying print the word hello if you run the pprint function, and it takes no arguments. But I've also imported everything from pprint, including pprint itself, and now I run pprint as though it's going to come from here, and I'm going to get errors because it says, well, this function takes no arguments, because I've imported it, so it's called pprint, but now I've overwritten it. Okay, I mean, obviously the same thing would happen if I did this, but at least here I'm aware of the fact that I'm specifically importing pprint, and I'm creating a function called pprint. Like you should be able to see that this is bad and this is not going to work. Okay, but what if we had to say, like, you know, so as maybe even a worse example, we would say something like from who import star. So import everything inside of this Houdini module. Well, now node would then be a function, would be a class instead of having to say who.node. And therefore, if I've created another class of my own called node, now I'm overriding the Houdini one, which means that anything else that I try and do to access the Houdini node class has been overwritten. So this is very bad, but it can be done. So you can do it in a controlled way if you know, for example, that you're importing one of your own modules and there are only a few functions in there and you don't want to have to call the module name every time. Okay, so that is possible, but there is a better way. If we don't want to always be referencing the same function, like module name and function name, then we can import something like we can say, let's just say, so from pprint import pprint. Okay, so that's one way. But we can import anything that we import, we can give an alias to. Okay, so maybe let's go back to just saying, okay, if we import the whole pprint module, but we say as, and then we can give it an alias. So let me just say, give it the alias p, right? So just one, so I'm going to shorten this for myself. Okay, so now if I say p.pprint, okay, in fact there, as I went p, you can see all of the the options within pprint, right? So I'm going to say p.pprint and then feed it a string, and then it will print it because I've now given this pprint module an alias of p. So if I use the word p, it now references the whole pprint module, right? But if I actually say here pprint.pprint, it's going to fail because I actually haven't imported the pprint module as pprint. I can't reference the module name over here because it was never imported as this. As it was imported, we gave it a nickname, okay? And it is now only known by that alias. So I have to put p over here and then .pprint, right? Now the same thing can be done with individual functions. So we can then say, so from pprint, so we know we don't want the whole module, we just want the pprint function, but I'm also tired of typing this every time, so I can now do this. So I'm saying from this module, import this function, but call that function p. And so now if I just say p and then that, then it's going to print that. Okay. So be careful of this, obviously. Giving it single letters or whatever can be very confusing when you look through your code. Normally we use small words like this, like one word, because it's simple enough, but also it's readable. You can, when you see the pprint function, it's very understandable. You kind of can guess what this is doing. So if you're reading someone else's code and it's called pprint, so if they've done it like this, that's understandable. But if you read someone's code and it just says p, this is sort of entering into that territory where you're like, what is this doing? Now you'd have to go to the top and kind of look through the whole thing. Like you can do the search and replace, well, you can do the search function and look for the letter P and kind of find where they've gone and like set P, and you go, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. P is pprint, therefore every time I see P, it's basically just a lot of unnecessary work. So just be careful. And also in loops and things like that, we often like to use a single letter as the temporary variable. You obviously can't do that if you've used a letter as a function name. So be careful with this, be cautious of it, right? But it is possible. So you can give things aliases. And in fact, you'll see later on, because I'm very descriptive with the name of my own custom modules that I make, I often will then have to say, like, from my very descriptive name, import, and then we're going to have an actual script called main. So every time it will be called main. But if we just import main, that's very confusing because every script that I import has the script name main for the actual main script. So we always do an import main as. So now we give it a variable, but also we don't want to have to import this entire name as well. So we just go, maybe my mod or something like that, right? So I can have a very descriptive name in the actual module name, and then every one of them has a main, but I give it a specific alias. So now when I say my mod dot whatever, and then I can run the functions from this module as though they're imported. Okay. All right, so, and one other thing, we're talking about creating aliases. You can also import, so I'm going to show you maybe a different one. So random. Random is a module, okay? So we can create random numbers using the random function, obviously. The random module. And within the random module, there is a random function. So random.random, okay? Which is a bit confusing. But that's how it works, okay? So the random module has a whole bunch of different functions for creating random numbers, including one that is literally just called random, okay? And it just generates a random number for us. And every time we generate it, it generates a different number, okay? Now what we can do is import random, and then later on you can actually set some variable to be equal to that module, because remember this module is an object, same as every other object. So I can create a foo variable and say that it is equal to random. Okay, so I'm not running the module or the function or anything. I'm just referencing it. So it sets foo to be essentially a variable, an alias for random. Okay, so now I can instead say, well, foo dot random, and it will do exactly the same thing. Okay, or I could do that with a function. So I can say random dot random, but not. So be very careful. If I do this, what it's doing is it's running random dot random, creating a random variable, a random number like this, and storing it in foo. So foo would be a float. This is not what I want. Instead, without the brackets at the end, I'm not running the function, I'm referencing the function. So I'm saying go into this random module, grab the function inside of there called random, and then referencing that, set foo to be an alias of that. And so now when I say foo and run it as a function, it will create a random number, because foo is running this. Okay, so it's essentially that word can be replaced with random.random. And so as we replace that, you'll see that that is our old code that it was. So instead we've given that a variable, and now we can just type foo and it will run our function. Okay, so yeah, that is mostly it with when it comes to modules. Now there are a few modules that are quite useful. I'll just quickly run through some of them, but in future lessons we're actually going to use these modules. So rather, like now I'll just kind of mention a few that are a little bit useful and would maybe be worth looking into, but as we use them will be a much more useful way of remembering what they do, because now to just memorize a bunch of random modules is kind of, it's not a good way to learn, but when we'll practically apply it, then it will sit in your memory a lot easier. So obviously it's really good to know the Houdini module. It's important to understand that Houdini has its own internal functions within Python, and so you need the Houdini module, but that is normally automatically imported. We only do it here because sometimes it breaks. Now we've also spoken about random, which contains a whole bunch of things to create random numbers. So you can create a random number between two different numbers, so within a range, or you can create a random integer instead of a random float. You can also control the seed. So if you control, like if you do print random dot random, then every time we do it's a different number, whereas if we do random dot seed and then feed it some sort of seed, then it will be the same number every time until we change the seed. Okay, so there's a cool way of kind of controlling that. We have obviously, pprint, which I showed you, but most of the time we're going to use pprint, where we're going to say from pprint import pprint, because I have honestly never used any other function within pprint except the actual pprint function, and so we're going to import it this way. I'm sure there are other useful functions in there, but really I haven't had a need for it. Import sys. So sys will be, sorry, let me just show you, print sys dot path. Path as an object. So we're going to use that. This is kind of a list of some of the paths that Python is aware of, and so we're going to essentially be, because this is your system path, so we're going to later on be actually appending things to this path so that Python will be able to reference it, so we can import things from here, like modules and things like that. So sys.path is something that we're going to use a lot within creating our own custom modules and our own custom code, right? We also have OS, which is just a bunch of functions to do with your operating system. So whenever we're going to be doing things like creating files and folders, or checking whether a file or folder actually exists, grabbing a path to a file, but then maybe breaking it up into different sections, all of that type of stuff we can do with OS. Okay, so that's your operating system. Re is regular expressions. If you've never heard of them, don't worry, like we are going to cover regular expressions later in its whole own separate lesson. In fact, it may even be multiple lessons. It is really powerful, very fun to do, maybe a little bit confusing at first, but once you understand it, it's amazing. So we will be covering regular expressions later, and re is the name of the regular expressions module. Okay. Basically what regular expressions is, just so that you're not confused, is it's a way of working with and manipulating strings, but we search through the string in a very dynamic way with some very special kind of search and replace type functions. It's extremely powerful. So yeah, we're going to cover that later. And yeah, I'd probably say that's about it from the common ones, except for a few that I want to cover in a lot more detail, so I won't even mention them here. I just want to point out that there is a dir function, right, which lets you basically grab the it returns a list of everything inside of that Houdini object, Python object. So for example, if you give it a module, it's going to list all of the functions within that module. Okay, so we can say, if we print dir of re, so re is the regular expressions module, then we're printing dir of that. It's going to print literally a list of functions and classes and magic methods and everything inside of this module. Okay, so for example, re.sub is a function that we will use. So now we know that in re there is a function called .sub. Okay, so because sometimes over here you find it doesn't appear. If I go re dot, it's not appearing automatically with that drop down list, which is a little annoying. It would be nice if it did appear, but we can do this to see that it works. And in fact, you see here how this is printing multiple lines, so having to wrap, and this is really frustrating. This is where we would use something like pprint. So we say from preprint import pprint, and then here, instead of doing the normal print function, we do the pprint function. But remember that it is an actual function, so we have to run it with curly brackets, round brackets, instead of just a normal keyword like this where it's space separated. So this is the correct way to do it. And then when we print this, it prints it nicely aligned. Okay, so this is what pretty print does. Okay, so now we can see everything inside of here, all of the magic methods and the other functions as well, the sub functions. Okay, so you can use dir and help as well. I'm going to go into this in more detail later, but there is a help as well. So you can print the help file, and that has its own formatting, so you don't need to pretty print it. And then it will go in depth into all the functions within that module, the classes, the everything. Okay, it also points to exactly where it is stored on the file and everything. Okay, so help is very useful for this. But yeah, we're going to go into detail later about how to use help properly and what this all means, and how to, because a lot of this can be very confusing. So sometimes it's going to confuse you more than help you. So we are going to have a whole lesson on how to use help in order to kind of actually help you properly. Right. Okay, so that's modules. Later on we will cover, though, creating our own ones. So for now, this is just how to work with some of them. But as we go and as we need modules, we will import them, which is actually the power of modules, is the fact that you don't need it until you need it. And then when you do need it, you import it. Okay. All right. So I hope that was very useful to you, and I'll see you all in the next lesson.